January 1944. The air over Tuskegee, Alabama, burned like an oven. Rows of old P-40s sat parked on the dusty runway, paint faded, engines silent. Captain Martin "Easy" Julian stood beside one of them, sleeves rolled up, eyes hidden behind dark glasses. For months, he and his men had trained under the same sun, day after day, waiting for orders that never came. Across the field, Lieutenant Joe "Lightning" Little was fighting his own battle with a stubborn engine. The prop coughed, then finally roared to life, throwing up a cloud of red dust. Lightning eased the throttle forward, too hard, too fast. The plane lurched, nose pitching high, wings wobbling. Through the radio, Easy's voice stayed calm but sharp. "Ease it down, Joe. You're about to stall." For one long second, that Warhawk hung there, almost weightless, then dipped hard, barely clearing the ground before climbing steady again. Lightning's laugh came through the static. "Told ya, Cap, she just needed a little faith." Easy let out a slow breath and made a mental note. Instinct, sharp. Judgment, terrible. That night, the barracks were thick with heat and silence. The Tuskegee pilots were ready to fight, but the war didn't seem ready for them. Lightning paced the floor, still wearing his flight jacket. They got white boys flying Mustangs in Europe, and we're still stuck here babysitting training planes. Easy sat on his bunk, flipping through the maintenance log. "We fly what they give us. We make it work. That's how we move up." Lightning shook his head. "Move up? We've been fighting for every inch since we were born." Outside, another plane screamed overhead. Somebody else's sky, somebody else's war. Easy finally said, quiet but certain, "Then we'll be ready when they can't ignore us anymore." The next morning, the briefing room smelled like sweat and chalk dust. Major Miller stood in front of the map with a pointer and the same look he always had, like he'd rather be anywhere else. He told them their assignment hadn't changed. Ground attacks, convoys, trains, depots. The escort missions would go to the mainline groups. Easy nodded, slow, controlled. Behind him, Lightning sat stiff, hands balled into fists. When the meeting ended, Lightning caught up with him outside. "Convoys again? They're wasting us. We're the best damn pilots here, and they've got us chasing trucks." Easy didn't break stride. Better to fly low than not fly at all. Lightning stepped in front of him. "You really believe that?" Easy met his eyes. "No, but believing it keeps the rest of them steady." The next day, 6 Warhawks rolled down the runway, engines howling in unison. Easy led the formation. Lightning flew tight on his right wing. Their target, a German supply train on the coast. At 600 feet, smoke from the shoreline blurred the horizon. Easy's voice came through the headset. "Hold formation. Stay with me." Lightning's hand tightened on the stick. "Copy that." He dove early, throttle wide open. Guns flashed. Tracers ripped through the air, slamming into the train yard below. A fuel car exploded, throwing a wall of fire across the tracks. The rest of the squadron followed, chaos turning into precision. When it was over, the mission report called it a success. Minor deviation from procedure. Lightning called it proof they were ready for real combat. Easy just called it luck. That evening, Easy found him outside the mess hall, sitting on a crate under the floodlights, watching the runway glow in the dark. "You saved fuel by breaking formation, huh?" Easy asked. Lightning didn't look over. "Saved time. Maybe even saved lives." Easy leaned against the wall beside him. "You ever wonder why I don't ground you?" Lightning grinned without turning. "Because you need me when things go bad." Easy shook his head. "No. Because one day it's gonna get bad for real. And I need you alive when it does." Lightning didn't answer. He just looked up at the night sky, where the sound of faraway engines reminded him that somewhere out there, other men were already fighting the war he was still waiting for. 3 weeks later, a telegram came through. Transfer orders. 3 32nd Fighter Group, deployment to Italy. Easy read it twice, folded it once, and handed it to Lightning. We're shipping out. Lightning blinked, disbelief turning into a grin. To fight? To prove, Easy said. No one cheered. They just packed their bags, folded their uniforms, and tucked away photos of home. The train rolled through Alabama, past cotton fields and church steeples, the windows open to warm wind and diesel smoke. Lightning stared out the window, watching home drift away. You think they'll really let us fight this time? Easy didn't answer right away. He watched the tracks stretching into the horizon. They'll have no choice. Italy did not smell like glory. It smelled like gasoline, wet canvas, and mud. Ramitelli Air Base sat on a busted strip of dirt near the Adriatic, nothing but pierced steel planking, laid over soggy ground, and a few tents pretending to be buildings. The wind came in cold off the water, carrying sea salt and diesel. The 332nd Fighter Group rolled in with duffels on their shoulders and hopes higher than their issued equipment. They had not been given P-51s. They had P-40s, old Warhawks, scarred, patched, loud. Some still had North Africa sand under the panels. Lightning walked up to his assigned plane and ran his hand across the skin of the fuselage. The paint was sun-faded and tired. Half the stenciling had peeled off. He snorted. This thing flew in somebody else's war already. Easy came up behind him. It'll fly in yours now. Ground crew was all hands. No luxury. No fuel truck. No clean line of armorers. Just men with funnels and jerry cans, lifting fuel by hand and pouring it down into thirsty engines that shook even while sitting still. Voice-over, in his head, not spoken out loud. While the rest of the world moved on to Mustangs, we were still strapping ourselves into museum pieces and calling it equal. Their first mission in Italy came fast. No welcome tour, no easing in. Target was a German convoy, pushing south along a narrow road just off the coast. Trucks, fuel carriers, light armor. The kind of target nobody brags about, but everybody needs destroyed. They went in low, Easy led. Lightning stayed off his wing, hungry, altitude, barely tree height. The Adriatic to the left, winter fields to the right, sun bouncing off the canopies and flashing white in their eyes. Easy's voice came in steady over the net. Stay tight. We hit hard, and we leave fast. Lightning's hands flexed on the stick. Copy. The convoy appeared ahead, like a row of match heads. The first truck swerved when it heard engines, too late. Lightning rolled over, lined up his shot, and squeezed. The nose guns spat bright fire, and the tracers walked straight into the lead truck. The cab burst, flipped, skidded sideways across the road. The rest of the line jammed up behind it like a clog in an artery. Easy came in next and raked the fuel carrier. The truck blew, and that explosion turned the whole road orange in one heartbeat. Pressure thumped through Lightning's cockpit. Radio lit up with yelling and laughing, that high kind of laugh men get when the fear hasn't drained out yet. That's a hit, that's a hit, that's a hit. He pulled up and looked down. Black smoke boiled straight into the sky. Half the column was already burning. The rest was scattering into the ditches. First blood. And it felt good. Not training good. Not simulated good. Real good. They went wheels down back at Ramitelli with engines still hot, and oil streaked all down their fuselages. Men were cheering before the props even stopped. Lightning jumped down from the wing, still buzzing, still grinning. Now, he thought, Now they have to see it. They did not. The debrief tent was always colder than outside, always somehow darker. A folding table, 2 clipboards, 1 white intelligence officer who never looked any of them in the eyes for longer than a second. Lightning sat forward on his crate, still in his flight suit. Easy stood behind him, arms crossed. Lightning said it clean. 2 trucks confirmed destroyed. 1 probable fuel carrier, secondary fire, ignited full convoy. Multiple secondaries after that. I saw at least 4 vehicles burning uncontrollably. The intel officer didn't look up. You got gun camera film. Lightning blinked. No gun camera. Then it's unconfirmed. Lightning stale. What do you mean unconfirmed? We turned that whole road into scrap. The officer finally glanced at him. Confirmed kills require either film or a confirming visual from an outside unit. Preferably a mainline squadron. Lightning let out a low laugh that wasn't really a laugh. Outside unit, meaning white? Nobody answered. Nobody had to. The form on the table said, no confirmed ground kills. Just like that. Mission logged. Impact erased. Back in the tent that night, nobody was loud. Lightning sat on his bunk with a harmonica in his hands, not really playing, just breathing into it slow. A tired little river of sound drifted through the dark, not happy, not sad, just worn. Across the room, Easy sat on a metal chair with a tin cup of something brown and mean. He wasn't a drinker, not really, not when people were watching, but he was drinking now. Lightning finally spoke, voice low. You ever get tired of this? Issa didn't look up. Of what? Of doing everything right for people who still call us boy. Easy let the liquor sit on his tongue before he swallowed. Being perfect is all we got. Lightning let that sit. He didn't like the answer. He also didn't argue, because he knew Easy was right. And that was the part that hurt the most. Word travels fast on a base, even a dirt strip like Ramitelli. Within a week, people were talking about the colored pilots, not the way they wanted, at first. Some bomber crews called them show ponies, said they were here for a newspaper story, not for the war. Then something happened that nobody planned and nobody expected. A general showed up, not a courier, not a desk man, a general. General Luntz. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't here on tour. He was here with a problem. Bombers headed to the Anzio beachhead were getting jumped and chewed apart before they could drop. Standard escort groups weren't sticking close. Escorts chased kills. Bombers died in pieces. He called in the 332nd. He looked the squadron over the way a buyer looks over an engine block. Not the paint, the build. Then he spoke, and even Lightning shut up. You boys want real work. You're getting it? Escort duty. Bomber protection. Anzio run. It wasn't glory. It was worse than that. It was responsibility. It meant this. If those bombers die, it's on you. You keep them alive, you live to fly tomorrow. You lose them, you don't fly again. Lightning felt it hit him like weight. Finally, someone was trusting them with something that actually mattered. Finally, someone was putting lives in their hands. Easy just nodded once. We'll take it. The first escort run was ugly. Cold sky, thin air, long range. They weren't up against trucks anymore. They were up against Messerschmitts. German Bf-109s came in high and fast, dropping down out of the sun like knives. The bombers were in tight formation, lumbering, big, full of men who couldn't maneuver, just had to sit there and pray the escorts did their job. That job was now Red Wing flight. That job was now them. Easy called it out calm. Take high side. Hold the line. Nobody chases. That last part was important. Most fighter groups chased kills. chased glory, broke formation and went hunting. That's how bombers died. You leave the herd, the wolves come in. Not today. Lightning saw one bomber start to drift. Port engines smoking. Tail gunner already firing short, desperate bursts. And he saw the German on him, a 109 sliding in on the bomber's 6, lining up the shot that would cut the tail clean off and send 10 men into the sea. Lightning didn't ask permission. He rolled in, full throttle, closed distance fast, came in so close to the German that he could see the pilot's goggles. He opened up, short burst, clean. The Messerschmitt's engine popped and spit flame. The fighter pitched away, smoking hard, then spun out and dropped. Lightning stayed on the bomber's wing, flying guard. He didn't peel off to finish the kill. He didn't chase the fireball. He stayed. The radio lit up with a voice he'd never heard before. Tight, shaken, white. Whoever you are sitting on my wing right now, I owe you my life. Lightning felt something hit him then that wasn't adrenaline. Respect, real respect. Not on paper, not in theory, in the air, where it counted. After that run, things changed. Not with the brass, not in the official logs. On the flight line, with the crews, bomber crews started asking for them. Not for any escort, for those escorts, for the colored boys, for the ones who didn't leave. Something else changed too. Paint. It started as an idea, a joke almost. The maintenance guys were tired of the bombers calling them by tail number or by race, like they were a type of equipment instead of men. So somebody brought out a bucket of red. The first time it went on, it wasn't pretty. It wasn't clean. It wasn't regulation. They painted the vertical tails of their fighters red, bright red. Could see it from half a mile off in bad light. Made them easy to ID. Made them impossible to ignore. Easy looked at it and just nodded. Good. Now they'll know who's keeping them alive. Next mission out, a B-17 on the way back to base came over the net, voice cracked and grateful. Thanks, Red Tails, whoever you are. And just like that, the name stuck. It wasn't a nickname. It was a banner. It was what they were now. Not the experiment, not the colored unit, Red Tails. And for the first time since Alabama, Lightning felt like he wasn't asking to be let into someone else's war. He was already in it. He was already shaping it. And if anybody doubted who owned that sky around those bombers now, they could follow the red. Italy had a strange kind of quiet between missions, the kind that didn't last long enough to be peace, but long enough to make you believe in it for a minute. The town of Tamoli sat a few miles off base cobblestone streets, laundry lines stretched across alleys, the smell of espresso cutting through diesel smoke. For the Red Tails, it was the closest thing to normal left in the world. Lightning wandered in one afternoon with his flight jacket half-zipped, still smelling of fuel and gunpowder. He wasn't looking for anything, but that's usually when life throws something your way. He found her behind a cafe counter, hair tied back, sleeves rolled, moving like someone who'd been working since the war started and hadn't stopped since. Her name was Sophia. Her smile looked out of place in a country still burning. She handed him a cup of coffee that was more steam than liquid, and for a second, he forgot the war existed. They started talking first in broken English, then in the kind of mixed language that happens when words don't matter as much as tone. She asked if he was American. He nodded. She asked if he flew planes. He said yes, sometimes too close to the ground. She laughed, said she could tell by the smell of oil on his jacket. That laugh, that was it. It hit him harder than any dogfight ever had. Days passed. Missions came and went. Sometimes he'd bike into town after a flight, still buzzing with the noise of engines in his ears. She'd already have coffee waiting. He started teaching her to ride the old bicycle out back of the cafe. She wobbled, cursed in Italian, laughed so hard she almost fell every time she got it right. Lightning would run beside her, steadying the seat, pretending not to be terrified of breaking her. At night, they'd sit by the seawall, watching flares bloom far off over the mountains, the war still there, just distant enough to feel unreal. She'd ask if he was scared up there. He'd tell her no, and mostly that was true. Then she'd ask why he kept flying. He thought about it for a while one night, hands buried in the pockets of his jacket, wind off the sea sharp in his face. "Because flying's the only place I ever felt equal," he said quietly. "Up there, nobody cares what color you are just if you can keep the wings level." She didn't answer. She just rested her head on his shoulder. Back at base, Easy noticed the change. Lightning started coming in quieter after missions, staying longer in town when he could. Easy said nothing at first, until the day he found Lightning sketching something in his notebook instead of sleeping. It was her, the shape of her hair, the tilt of her face, drawn in pencil on a page that had once held flight plans. Easy didn't need to ask. He just sat across from him and said flatly, "War doesn't make room for love." Lightning didn't look up from his drawing. "Then I'll steal a little space," he said. Easy sighed, staring at the paper between them, half love, half doom. He'd seen too many pilots fall in love with things they couldn't keep. The sky over Ramatelli turned strange that week, quiet for too long. Then came the sound they'd learned to fear. The low, steady rumble that meant German bombers were coming. It started just after midnight. Air raid sirens tore through the dark. Engines coughed awake. Men ran barefoot through mud, shouting over one another. Lightning was halfway to the flight line when he saw the first flare burst above the horizon, a green-white bloom lighting the entire field. Then came the whistle of bombs. He dove behind a truck as the first explosions ripped through the tents. Shrapnel tore the air. The ground shook like the earth itself wanted out. Easy's voice came over the radio, rough, half-yelled, "Get to your planes. We're under attack." Lightning ran, but his eyes weren't on the sky, they were on the road leading to town. Sophia's town. The bombers weren't hitting just the base. They were carpet-bombing everything in a straight line north. When the raid ended, the world felt hollow, no sound but the hiss of burning fuel and the distant moan of sirens. Lightning's plane was fine. He wasn't. He didn't wait for orders. He took a jeep and drove toward Tamole, past craters, smoke, and twisted metal. The cafe was gone. The whole street was gone. He found the spot where the counter used to be by memory, the smell of roasted beans still hanging in the air like a ghost. He started digging through the rubble with his bare hands. Stones, splinters, glass, blood on his knuckles, dust in his mouth. He found it after an hour, a square of fabric pressed flat beneath a broken beam. Her handkerchief, still folded, still clean in the middle. He stood there for a long time, holding it like it could still mean she was alive somewhere. The smoke thinned, the sun started to come up, and for the first time in his life, Joe Lightning Little felt fear. Not the kind he'd felt when tracer rounds missed by inches. Not the kind that came before a mission. This was worse. This was the kind that comes when you realize someone gave you something to lose. Back at base, the others didn't ask where he'd been. They didn't have to. He flew the next morning anyway. Didn't talk, didn't eat, didn't sleep. Easy watched from the tarmac as Lightning's plane disappeared into the clouds. For a long while, nothing but silence. Then the radio cracked. His voice came through, steady as stone. Target in sight, going in. There was no fear in it, no hesitation. Only purpose. And somewhere between the roar of the engine and the rush of wind past his canopy, Lightning finally understood what love and loss meant that they weren't opposites. They were the same thing, seen from different altitudes. War changes fast, but sometimes it changes in a single afternoon. The field at Ramitelli had never been this loud. Ground crew was shouting over engines. Men were climbing over wings. Someone actually laughed out loud. That almost never happened anymore. The reason sat in a clean row along the runway. Not P-40s, not hand-me-downs, Mustangs, P-51 Mustangs. Long nose, bubble canopy, silver skin that caught the sun and threw it back like a blade. They didn't look like the planes the red tails had been flying. They looked like the planes people wrote about. General Luntz had come back. He didn't come with speeches. He came with hardware. New airframes, fresh out of stateside depots, Merlin engines under the cowl, painted tails waiting for color. Lightning walked slow toward the closest Mustang like a man walking toward something holy. He brushed his hand along the fuselage and stopped when he got to the nose, right under the spinner. Easy stood there already, one hand flat on the skin of the aircraft like he was greeting an animal that could kill if it wasn't spoken to right. Rolls-Royce Merlin V1650 engine, Easy said quietly, more to himself than to anyone else. Packard built, liquid-cooled, high-altitude rated. Lightning Justale. Translation, he muttered under his breath. She's fast. Fast didn't even start to cover it. The P-51 could run with anything in the sky at 30,000 feet and still have gas to get home. It had the range to follow the bombers all the way in and all the way out. 650 caliber Brownings in the wings. Smooth bubble canopy with clean rear visibility. No blind spot at your 6. Climb rate like a fist being thrown straight up. Compared to the tired P-40s, this wasn't an upgrade. It was a resurrection. The ground crew had already started painting. Buckets of red. Brushes, working fast over metal. The tails went bright first. Clean, vivid, impossible to miss. Red tails, Lightning said softly, almost like a prayer. Around them, the rest of the squadron gathered in, eyes wide, faces split between hunger and disbelief. Men who'd been told they didn't belong in the first place now, standing in front of the best fighter America had. For the first time, the gear in their hands finally matched the skill in their bodies. Easy climbed up onto the wing and turned to face them. No microphone, no stage, just a squadron in the mud and the cold, looking up at him. "Listen up," he said. The talking stopped. "We are not flying decoys anymore." Heads lifted. "We are not flying cleanup." Their eyes were all on him now. "We are not just escorts." He let that hang, let the words settle into muscle. "We are guardians." That hit different. That word, guardians. You could see the men straighten. You could feel the line in the dirt get drawn. From that moment on, those bombers weren't just part of the mission. They were theirs. The first time those new Mustangs went north, the sky felt different. They launched before dawn, engines howling, silver wings catching the first thin blue of morning. The bombers' big B-17 flying fortresses lumbered along in tight box formations over the Adriatic, then bent inland, heading towards central Germany. That was deep, too deep for comfort. The kind of range most old escorts couldn't hold without turning back and leaving the heavies naked. But the red tails weren't turning back. They slid into position and locked on like steel snapping shut. From the bomber cockpits, the red tails were easy to count. Little flags of color moving just off the wings like bodyguards. The radio chatter from the bomber crews started off cautious. "Who are these guys?" Then it shifted. "Stick with us, red tails. Stay tight, red tails. We see you, red tails." Then it quieted, because the Germans had arrived. They didn't come in lazy. They came in like knives. Messerschmitt Bf 109s, dropped in from high front, cutting across the bomber stream in fast diving slashes, firing and breaking away. Focke-Wulf 190. As rolled in from the beam, heavy cannons lighting up the air, with shells big enough to peel skin off a fortress. But this time, the Germans weren't the problem. Something else came in behind them. Something nobody on the Red Tail's side had seen in the air before. For a second, Lightning thought his eyes were lying. The shape was wrong. The wings were swept differently. The engine noise wasn't a piston roar. It was a scream, a ripping sound like metal tearing through the sky itself. Me-262, the German jet. The first time it passed the bomber boxes, nobody reacted fast enough to stop it. It didn't dogfight. It didn't turn. It didn't circle. It just cut through the formation like a bullet through paper, cannons spitting, and one of the B-17s shuddered, caught fire, and peeled out of the sky with 2 engines gone in flame. The wounded bomber dropped, trailing black smoke, crew still inside. Lightning felt his stomach go cold. That thing just outran them like they were standing still. The Me-262 was fast, twice a Mustang's straight-line speed in level flight. Fast enough to hit, kill, and vanish before a normal fighter could even close the distance. For a heartbeat, the Red Tails watched it rip past and understood what it meant. If the Germans ever figured out how to send these in waves, the war in the air would change overnight. Then something else happened. They adapted. That was the thing about these men. That was always the thing. They were used to fighting from behind. They were used to surviving in gaps. Easy's voice came across the net, hard and sharp. Diamond hold, cross lock, do not chase. That was new. Nobody chased the jet. You didn't chase a ghost. You made the ghost come back to you. 4 red tails tightened around the bomber box, flying not in a loose screen but in an overlapping X. 1 low left, 1 high left, 1 high left, 1 low right, 1 high right. Every angle of approach covered, every gun already pointed where the jet would have to come if it wanted another clean kill. Lightning slid into high right, jaw clenched, eyes locked on his corner of sky. "Come on," he whispered. The Me-262 saw the wounded bomber that hadn't gone down yet and banked in for the finish. It came screaming back through the formation, confident, aggressive, certain. This time it flew straight into a wall of .50 caliber. Lightning squeezed and held. The Mustang shook under him as 6 Brownings poured fire across the jet's nose and intake. The others hit from their corners at the same instant, all 4 streams of fire crossing like scissors on a single point. The jet flinched. A spark jumped off its right nacelle. Then fire. For the first time in that war, in that sky, over that deep part of enemy country, a German jet shuddered, trailed black smoke, rolled over, and fell. Lightning watched it tumble end over end, pieces streaking off in burning arc. For a heartbeat, courage flew faster than jet engines. The bomber they were covering leveled out, still flying, still alive. Red tails held formation. Nobody broke. Nobody chased. Nobody bragged on the radio. They just stayed. And the bomber crews, watching this from plexiglass noses and waist gun windows, understood something in that moment that no report on any desk back in Washington could have captured. These men will not leave us. Not for glory, not for a kill, not for anything. The call came 2 days later. Berlin. Deep strike. Full bomber stream. Heavy payload. High altitude run past every piece of flak the Reich still had left. No one said suicide out loud. They didn't have to. Everybody knew. The plan was simple, the way impossible things are always simple. The heavies would go all the way in, hit the capital, punched the last teeth out of what was left of German command and industry. The escorts would keep them alive long enough to do it. That escort, for the core of the run, over the worst air in Europe, over the most defended city left in the war, red tails. Morning of the mission, Ramitelli felt wrong. Too quiet, too slow. Men moved like they were underwater. No jokes, no noise, a lot of writing. Lightning sat alone on an overturned oil drum with Sophia's handkerchief folded in his palm. He ran his thumb along the edge of it like he was smoothing out something that couldn't be smoothed. Easy walked up, holding a helmet under one arm. "You're flying number 2 with me," Easy said. Lightning didn't answer. "He's not asking," a crew chief muttered nearby without looking up. Lightning finally looked over. "Lead element's mine," Lightning said. "Negative. You're not telling me no, Easy." "I am." "You're not." Lightning stood, and for a second they weren't captain and lieutenant. They were two men who had both already buried pieces of themselves in this war. "Let me finish what we started," Lightning said. Easy stared at him. No anger, just that heavy, tired kind of hurt. "You're not doing this for the mission," he said quietly. Lightning shook his head. "I'm doing it for all of it." Easy closed his eyes for one long breath. When he opened them, the call was already made. "Lead is yours," he said. That was how it went, not because Easy believed Lightning would come back. Because Easy knew Lightning had decided a long time ago that coming back wasn't the only kind of winning. They hit German airspace, and the world turned into metal. Flak started first, black flowers blooming all around the bomber stream. Each burst a flash followed by a puff of oily smoke that hung in the air like ink. You could feel the concussions through the plane. You could feel the skin of the Mustang shake like a drum head. Then the fighters came, Bf-109 swarming in 2s and 3s, FW-190s diving out of sun glare, and, slicing through all of it, the Me-262s screaming in and out like lightning strikes. The sky over Berlin did not look like sky. It looked like a scrapyard on fire. Lightning flew lead, red tail bright against all that black smoke and white contrail. He talked almost constantly, voice steady, giving spacing calls, threat calls, altitude calls. "Move left 2. Hold the topside. Watch your low 6. Don't chase." Bomb bay doors opening, came the call from one of the heavies. "Almost there. Almost." Then it happened fast. A Me-262 came in from high rear, full throttle, nose guns lit. It went straight for the lead bomber in the center box, the box that anchored the whole formation. Kill that one, the rest lose shape. Lose shape, the flak chews them to bones. Lightning saw it coming. He didn't wait. He rolled his Mustang over and dove straight across the bomber formation, putting himself between the jet and the fort like he was throwing his own body in front of a bullet. He fired first. Short burst. Clean. The jet flashed by so close, he could feel the slipstream yank at his own wings. For a split second, he saw the German pilot's face through the canopy. Young, focused, shocked. Then the 262 coughed smoke and pitched over, trailing flame, dropping hard. "Got him," someone yelled over the net. They never said his name. They didn't have to. But it wasn't clean. Lightning had flown straight through fire to get that shot, and somewhere in that blur, he took a hit. Easy saw it before Lightning felt it. "Lightning, check your port wing. You're venting." No answer. "Lightning, respond." Lightning's Mustang was still flying, but the left wing was bleeding fuel in a long, misting vapor trail. The engine sounded wrong in the mic, too much rattle, too much air in the throat of it. Lightning finally came back on. "I'm still with you." His voice was calm, too calm. Easy's throat went tight. "Break off, Head south. You're leaking hard. You won't make it over the city. Negative. That's an order. No reply. Instead, Lightning pulled back up into position. Not tight anymore, not perfect, a little low, a little wobbled, but there. He held until the bombers reached target. Bombs away, the fortresses called. And then Berlin lit. From that altitude, it didn't even look like a city. It looked like a sheet of flame opening up on the ground. Objective, complete. A navigator's voice called out, shaking. Turn out, turn out, turn out. The forts began their slow banking turn to exit. Every gunner still firing blind into the chaos. Every engine straining to stay alive. Easy dropped low to cover the backside of the formation, eyes moving non-stop, calling threats, calling angles. Lightning didn't turn. Lightning, nothing. Lightning answer me. Static. Lightning's Mustang drifted, nose dipping down just a hair, smoke trailing harder now off the wing route. He was losing oil, losing fuel, losing altitude. Easy could see the canopy still intact. He could see Lightning moving in the cockpit, one hand still on the stick. Then Lightning's voice came through one last time. Tell Easy, we did it. That was all. No panic, no fear, no goodbye. Just that. Then the red-tailed Mustang dropped through broken cloud, slipping under the bomber stream and vanishing into white. Easy's stomach turned to ice. Lightning. Lightning respond. Lightning, do you copy? Lightning, answer me. Do you copy right now? Answer. Nothing but static. Nothing but engines. Nothing but the heavy breathing of men who had just watched one of their own disappear and still had to fly the next 500 miles home like nothing in the world had just torn loose. Easy kept calling long after there was no logic in calling. Lightning never came back on the net. The bombers made it home. Every crew that still had an airplane under them landed bloody, shaken, alive. The report went up. Berlin strike successful. Escort performance exceptional. Bomber losses minimal. Later, in quiet, the fortress crews would tell anyone who'd listen. Red tails never left us. Red tails stayed. Red tails blocked jets with their own bodies. And one of them, a loudmouth kid with hands too fast and a heart that never backed off, died, making sure we lived long enough to see friendly water. They didn't know his name, but Easy did. He walked out alone to the edge of the runway at Ramatelli that night and stared at the empty piece of sky where Lightning should have been. The engines were quiet now. The field was still. The red paint on the tails of the Mustangs was still wet in places, still bright in the moonlight. Guardians, he'd said. He hadn't understood, when he said it, the cost. Now he did. And from that point on, every bomber group in Europe started asking the same question before a single wheel left the ground. Are the red tails with us on this run? Because, if they are, we've got a chance to get home. They came home heavy, engines low, radius quiet, formation tight. The bombers made final approach over the Adriatic in long, slow lines, limping but alive. You could see holes punched through their wings. You could see scorch marks down the fuselage where cannon fire had kissed metal and almost opened it up. You could see waist gunners slumped at their stations, still gripping their guns like they were afraid to let go. But you could also see something you almost never saw after a deep run like Berlin. All of them, every fortress in that box. 0 bombers lost. 0. On the ground at Ramatelli, crew chiefs and medics and armorers watched the B-17 wheels kiss steel planking one after another, and it spread through the line like a shockwave. They all made it. They all made it. By the time Easy brought his Mustang down, the whole base felt wrong. Too quiet, too still, like the sound had been sucked out of the air. He rolled to a stop. killed the Merlin. The prop wound down slow. Nobody was cheering. Nobody ran up slapping backs or yelling or throwing helmets in the air. They just stood there waiting for lightning to taxi in behind him like he always did. That little pause, that little cocky burst of throttle, that signal that said, "Still here, boys." And nothing came. Easy took off his flight helmet and set it on the wing. His hands stayed there a beat too long, knuckles white on bare metal. He wasn't looking at anybody on the ground. He was looking at the empty piece of sky where lightning should have been. Men started to understand without anybody saying a word. One of ours is gone, but all of theirs came home. The trade sat in the air, heavy, ugly, holy. No bomber crews lost. One pilot missing. Nobody said his name out loud yet. They didn't have to. Debrief ran different that night. Usually, it's forms and gun camera film and kill claims and ammo counts and fuel math and all the little numbers that keep a war machine running like a ledger. Not this time. The bomber squadron commander, white hair, grey face, too many missions in his eyes, walked straight across the pierced steel planking and shook Easy's hand with both of his. He held it too long. He was still shaking when he let go. "You boys did good," he said. That was it. 4 words. Flat, tired, honest. That's how real respect sounds in combat. It's never pretty. Behind him, one of the Fortress co-pilots leaned in close to one of the Ramitelli crew chiefs and muttered so only he could hear. About damn time, they noticed. Word went up the chain like fire. Escort discipline. Exceptional. Enemy had neutralized. Bomber survival rate. Perfect. There it was. Perfect. That word. The same word Easy had thrown at lightning in the barracks back in Alabama. Be perfect. It's all we got. Now the mission report had the same word stamped on it in green pencil like it was just math. Perfect. Intel officers who'd barely made eye contact with them a month ago shook their hands. White bomber crews crossed the line to slap shoulders and say things like, "Appreciate you, Red Tails, and couldn't have done it without you, and you stuck. You stayed." Somebody said he'd never seen anything like the way the Mustangs flew the box. Somebody else said he'd watched a Red Tail put his whole aircraft between a jet and their ship, and he still couldn't believe a man would do that for him. Easy nodded. He thanked them. He said the right things, but he wasn't celebrating. His eyes kept drifting out past the fuel drums and tents, out where the runway cut into the dark. He was waiting for a shape that wasn't coming back. That night, the squadron gathered in the mess tent. No music, no cards, no noise. Guys just sat on ammo crates and folding chairs, boots still muddy, jackets still on. No one had showered yet. No one had the energy. On the table in the middle sat Lightning's helmet. Somebody had set it there without saying anything. Somebody else had laid Sophia's handkerchief across the top of it. Nobody admitted to doing that either. For a long time, Easy didn't speak. When he finally did, his voice sounded like gravel. He said Lightning held the line. He said Lightning locked the box. He said Lightning didn't break formation even when he was hit. He said Lightning made sure every last bomber found a way home. He didn't say Lightning died. He said Lightning kept his promise. And every man in that tent understood what that meant. Lightning had always said it. Let me finish what we started. Now he had. Next morning, Command sent word down. Commendations incoming. Unit citation recommended. Formal recognition to follow. Simple message. Cold language. But under the words was something else. Something that wasn't written but was understood. They couldn't be treated like a side act anymore. The Red Tails weren't an experiment. They weren't a publicity story. They weren't a footnote. They were now the go-to escort group on the most dangerous missions in the European theater. They had delivered 0 bomber losses on a Berlin run. No one else could say that. There was talk, quiet talk, that Easy would be up for a medal, maybe more than one. There was talk that certain pilots, Lightning among them, would be put in for the highest kind of honor a pilot could get. Easy listened. He nodded. Then he looked back up at the sky. Medals don't bring a pilot back. He didn't say that out loud. He didn't have to, because the men around him felt the same thing, and you could feel it bouncing between them with every breath. Grief and pride, tied together so tight, you couldn't separate one from the other. The war ended not long after. Not that day, not that week. But the line had already started to break. Allied bombers were now punching the German heart and coming back alive. Fuel was running out on the other side. Pilots were running out on the other side. Hope was running out on the other side. And the red tails were still in the air. Then came the day the engines finally stopped. Ramitelli went quiet. No scramble sirens, no mission boards, no more lines of fuel cans, no more men sleeping in flight suits because a call could come any minute. Some of them stayed for occupation duty. Some rotated out. Some shipped home early. Some shipped home in crates. When it was finally Easy's turn to go back across the water, it wasn't to parades. It wasn't to a hero's welcome. It was a train platform and a duffel bag, and the same country that had called them unfit to fly in the first place, still trying to decide what they were allowed to be. Some folks back home shook his hand. Some folks back home wouldn't serve him at a counter. That was America in 1945. You could save 10 white crews in the air on Tuesday and still get called boy on Wednesday. But that wasn't the end of it, because something had shifted, and not just overseas. Every bomber crew who flew with them went home telling the same story. We asked for red tails. We watched red tails hold formation. We watched red tails die for us and never turn loose. Don't you dare tell me what those men can or cannot do, and you cannot put that story back in the box. Not after enough people have heard it. Years later, Easy stood at a memorial. Not a big famous one. Not the marble type with politicians talking about sacrifice like it's a word they invented. This one was smaller. A clean stone marker under open sky. Names carved in simple lines. Men who never got to grow old. All of them cut off in the middle of their sentence. He stood there in his dress uniform, older now. Not old, just older in the eyes. Shoulders still straight, jaw still set. He traced Lightning's name with 2 fingers. Joe Little. No rank, no race, just a name and a date. His voice, when it finally came, was low, not angry, not sad, just true. They called us colored, he said. They called us unfit. They called us experiments. Then he looked up, like he was looking through time instead of air. But up there, the only color that mattered was red. Red on the tail, red in the sky, red for the men we swore we'd bring home. He let that sit in the silence. He wasn't talking to the dead only. He was talking to the living, to whoever came next, to whoever would try to say again that some pilot, because of his skin, didn't belong in a cockpit over America's fight. History likes to flatten people, turn them into plaques and dates and trivia questions. But the truth is not flat. The truth sounds like this. They fought for a country that doubted them. They flew for freedoms that weren't even theirs yet. They held the line when nobody expected them to. They guarded men who didn't always respect them, and brought those men back alive anyway. They took junk planes and turned them into weapons. Then they took Mustangs and turned them into legends. They bled in silence, and they won out loud. They made their own name, Red Tails. Once, that was just paint. Now, it's a chapter. Now, it's a standard. Now, it's a promise. Final tally, long after the smoke cleared. Bomber groups survived because of them. Enemy aces learned their call signs. Commanders asked for them by name. Young pilots coming up, black kids who'd been told not to aim too high, suddenly had proof in front of them that the ceiling wasn't real. You can measure impact in medals if you want. You can measure it in sorties. You can measure it in kill credits. You can measure it in how many lives made it home. Or you can measure it in something simpler. The day America ran out of excuses, because after the Red Tails, nobody could ever again say with a straight face that ability belongs to one color, one school, one neighborhood, one last name. Not after Berlin. Not after Anzio. Not after lightning held position with a wing full of holes so strangers could live. Not after Easy brought home every bomber on a route that was supposed to be suicide. In the end, that's what the legacy is. Not just victory, not just hero stuff, obligation. A that, a marker laid down in blood and metal that says, this is the standard now. This is who we are now. Catch up, because the sky already did. They became, in that winter, in that fire, in that thin air over Germany, the wings of history.